Hi, this time I wanted to talk about an aspect of solo role-playing games that is also related to your standard RPG session playing with your own group that I find quite fascinating. And several years back, when I first started to play solo role-playing games, I also found it uh, a bit difficult to deal with because I got that analysis paralysis. It really got me thinking, spending some time trying to figure out how to better handle things. And this is the subject of random encounters in solo role playing games. And as I said a bit earlier, it's also going to be helpful, in my opinion, when it comes to handling random encounters as a game master with your group. So let's get started. You could say that a solo RPG session is composed of many random encounters, random events. There is a degree of control over those encounters because in some way they are related to the plotline, to the things that have happened earlier in that adventure or in the campaign. Perhaps if you are playing the second or third or fourth adventure within a campaign, it could be related to past events. But sometimes it is not so. Sometimes you're just generating things with your tables, with your oracles, etc. And it seems unrelated or quite a certain distance away from the main plotline. So when I first started to play solo RPGs, I used generic encounter tables. Just your typical tables of monsters divided by levels according to what you're facing, depending on the environment and such. And it was practical, it was satisfying in a way. But as I started to get a bit more experience with solo RPGs, it felt a bit too disconnected to the main plotline, from the main plotline. And so I thought maybe I have to tailor or create these tables with different non-player characters, sites, objects, etc. that are directly connected to the main plotline or to side quests, perhaps. So I started to do that. It took a bit more time, of course. And when I started to play like that, it also worked, but it felt too artificial. Like every random encounter had some sort of connection with the main plotline, so it just seemed too staged, too artificial, not organic enough. And then I decided to go for a combination of both. I decided to build a table that contained many generic encounters, but it also contained a few encounters directly linked to the plotline or to side quests, subquests, etc. I have also experimented using two separate tables, one table with important events and that is important encounters related to the plotline, and another table with generic encounters. Because it makes sense that if you are looking for some sort of realism, not all of the random encounters that you will face or that will happen when you are moving through a region or a zone to get to your objective, they are not all going to be connected to what is going on, the thing that you are pursuing, what you are investigating. But because you are involved or into a certain affair or business or anything, it's logical to think that many of the things that you could encounter on your way from point A to point B, they could have something to do with the quest. Maybe you are chasing down some group of bandits or mercenaries. It makes sense that perhaps some mercenaries are staying behind to ambush you. Maybe you want to kill their leader or whatever, sorry. So it makes sense that they are leaving someone behind to attack you. So that could be a random encounter. And it also depends on the environment, of course. If you are going into a territory that is quite close by to a necromancer's lair, you're going to find zombies, skeletons, wights, roaming about. So it all depends on your mood and how you want to build that solo adventure. In my opinion, my personal recommendation is that you either go for the route of creating a table of mixed encounters with some generic non-player characters and places and objects, but also so you have some results within that same table related to the main plot line. They should be minor in comparison. Maybe you have like, let's say 7 generic encounters and 3 encounters that have to do with the plot line. Or you could also do it the other way that I mentioned, that you have 2 separate tables. Perhaps maybe your character or the characters, in case you are playing with your group, you're moving through a swamp and you make your random encounters roll. Maybe you set it so that if you roll 7 or 8 on an 8-sided die, then there is an encounter. You make that roll and it resulted in an encounter. So now maybe you want to roll a d6, and if you roll 1, 2, 3, or 4, you get a generic encounter. If you roll 5 or 6, then that encounter is directly related or connected to the main plotline or to a side quest. So the possibilities are limitless. And it makes sense if we compare it to real life, of course. Let's say that you decide to walk down the street because you want to buy something at the store or buy some food or anything. Maybe along the way you don't encounter anything. Maybe you encounter a dog, maybe just some birds fly by, or maybe you encounter a friend. You encounter your good friend Johnny, your neighbor, and you talk with Johnny and all of that, and that's it. Nothing else happens. But what if Johnny is going through a predicament? Maybe you can help. Or maybe Johnny offers some advice that helps you. It also depends on the place where you meet Johnny, of course. Maybe you meet Johnny and suddenly both of you notice that there's a memory card or a USB device that somebody dropped and it's just there on the ground. Maybe what do you do with that? Do you take it to a lost and found sort of place? Do you decide to keep it and to see what's in it? Maybe it contains a virus, maybe it contains something important, maybe it contains some compromising information. Or do you decide to wait a bit to see if someone returns to pick it up? Do you leave it on the ground? Is it safe to wait for you if someone decides to come back, as the person that dropped that memory card or whatever? Maybe that person has bad intentions, or maybe doesn't want to risk that you perhaps decided to take a look at what's inside the memory card or the USB device, and now that person wants to silence you. So as you can see, there are many possibilities for adventures there in your everyday life, and you can also use that as an example to create interesting random encounters. And going further into developing the place of the encounter, maybe you meet Johnny in another place. Maybe you went out of your house earlier or later, and because of that you ended up in a different place, and Johnny was also in that place too. And now not only did you encounter Johnny, you also saw that down that alleyway there is a new bookstore. Do you want to enter that bookstore? Is there going to be something interesting if you enter that bookstore? Are you going to find some mysterious book? Is it going to be a very ordinary situation? And that serves as an example for those random encounters. When I first started to play role-playing games, not solo role-playing games, role-playing games, the hobby, I didn't know how to handle random encounters. I still had that video game mentality. You know, in video games like Final Fantasy, or at least the earlier Final Fantasies, where you get into a random encounter, it's just that the screen like flashes into this battle sequence, you fight some enemies, and that's it. There is almost nothing else happening. There are some exceptions, like for example in Final Fantasy VI, which would be Final Fantasy III when it was brought to America. In Final Fantasy VI, there were some moments where you could actually recruit some characters in those random encounters, and you got some clues for other events. So whenever you are building those random encounters, I think it's also a good idea to have a separate table to determine the location where that encounter happens. If you don't want to spend too much time making those rolls, maybe you could improvise the location, but you could also have your table to determine if it happened in near a lake or in a clearing or near some trees. And there could be some interesting objects as well, like I mentioned in the case of the memory card or the USB device. In the case of a fantasy game, maybe you find some sort of monolith or some strange artifact lying on the ground. Maybe you find a grave. It could be anything. So it's also a good idea perhaps to make a roll, a percentage roll, to see if there is a chance of encountering some strange object or terrain feature that could perhaps impact that encounter. And like I said, not all of the encounters have to be something so grandiose or lethal or worrisome. I enjoy it quite a bit when my players are a bit tense because of the dangers of the adventure, and I make my rolls as they are moving through an area to determine random encounters, and they got a random encounter. And I'm making a roll to see what they encounter, and they're kind of like nervous because they don't know if it's going to be something too dangerous or perhaps helpful, so they have that sense of expecting something important. So I tell them, you walk into the clearing and suddenly you hear noise up above in the sky. There's a sound of flapping, and you look above and you see a few ducks flying by. And that's it. So it could be like a tension breaker. They could feel a bit relief, but it also depends. Maybe they're looking for food. Their journey is not over, and they are taking advantage of what nature has in store, and they decide to hunt the ducks to eat later on. Maybe if you roll some random results related to plants and trees, maybe some of those plants are edible. Maybe one of the player characters has a lot of is very skilled in bushcraft and survival, and that character manages to collect some plants to eat later on. So yes, the possibilities are pretty much limitless. So when it comes to solo role-playing games, I think it's worth it to invest some time on planning out ahead some tables with different encounters that could be unrelated to the main plotline, but to sprinkle some encounters that really affect the course of events. It's also worth it to add that percentile chance of finding objects and terrain features. It's also going to spice things up a bit. If there is a battle, you could use those terrain features or perhaps those objects during combat. Because when you play a solo RPG, you're already preparing a lot of things by yourself. It's only going to take a few minutes for you to put a bit more preparation in those random event tables. I also wanted to create this video because I'm going to be reviewing a total of 8 tools to spice up your games, your solo games, and even those yes, your typical standard RPG session with your group. One of those, the series of those tools, one of those series, sorry, it's called Objects of Intrigue, if I remember correctly, and the other one is going to be Random Encounters. So when you see Random Encounters on the title of one of my videos or Objects of Intrigue, then you know it's one of those tools. I am going to create a playlist and I'm going to put it in the description of this video. And there is like this little object here, like it's getting moved around, sorry. There we go. Because they have the ceiling fan and it's moving papers and all that. And so yes, please check out those reviews. I think they're going to be highly useful to generate generic encounters, to tailor specific encounters. What I like of those tools is that you have tables and subtables, so everything is going to be kept new and fresh with each encounter, and they could also serve as inspiration for you to come up with your own encounters with non-player characters and with objects, mysterious objects and terrain features that you find in those seemingly random events. It's also going to be very easy for you to connect those results to different oracles and tables and game master emulators, or if you are running a game as a game master with a emulated player character or player characters, when you use, for example, Abraham's method, please check out the link in the description below. It's also going to be useful that way. It's all up to you how you're going to be tweaking and using those tools. So thank you for watching this video, and thank you so much to those that have been supporting the channel by sending DriveThruRPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you, and please share your thoughts on random encounters and how you use them in your typical group sessions with other players or as a solo RPG experience. Thank you, and see you later.